With the 2026 schooling academic calendar drawing near, most parents have started shopping for stationery and uniforms for their children. Over the years, the list of stationery requirements at public schools has become a contentious subject. It has evolved to include items such as wet wipes, toilet paper, and other cleaning supplies such as detergent and pine gel, going beyond just books, paper glue, dictionaries, and pencils. The Department of Education does not regulate practical learner requirements, leaving schools to use their own discretion. Let's discuss why it's important for parents to comply despite the financial challenges. Clinical psychologist and education expert with 20 years experience in the NGO and education sector, Gerald Williamson, joins me for this chat. Gerald, thank you very much for your time. I mean, I've highlighted some of the items that schools now want, and it all boils down to how you planned financially from December going into January, right?
Of course, Linda, this is a very contentious issue in a country that is living through difficult economic times and where parents are financially pressed. I would like to argue that this conversation that me and you are having is not a new one. You go back 30 years and we would be having the same conversation at the same time, the same date every year. And that is because South Africa's economic circumstances has always pinned parents and their backs against the wall. So yes, it's a difficult time and it's a contentious time, and it has just become more complicated with the demands that some of the schools are putting both on parent and child.
Yeah, and let's talk about those lists, right? Because, I mean, when you go into the new year, if learners don't have what is required on the first day, then it certainly does affect learning and teaching, doesn't it?
Well, it's a razor blade issue here. Whilst, the adult world is going about their business, drawing up lists of requirements and pressures, and parents feeling pressurized and stressed out. I think as a clinical psychologist and educationist, I interpret your question more as what's the type of pressure that the child feels in the classroom, amongst peers. And that part, I note that it can be very devastating. Now, we're obviously talking about a new child versus also a child that has been there repeatedly every year. So there will be two different effects. The younger the child, the child will feel a sense of, yes, I don't have those things, but they're less likely to interpret that pressure in a negative way unless the teacher in that class makes it a negative thing and doesn't soften the blow of not having, despite the parents maybe not delivering on their requirements. But for the older child who's been there repeatedly, and now they are able to also apply some form of insight and emotions into it, might be devastating. There might be the feeling of sadness, a feeling of loss, a feeling of being anger. Anger is one of the feelings that children, especially older children going towards the teens, they endure in those classrooms. So yes, there is an emotional impact for those children who are sitting in class and who are unable to comply.
Yeah, you speak about the emotional pressures on the child, who will then come back home and stress the parent even further. And when you look at some of the prices, I mean, I was buying stationery in December and I found them to be a lot cheaper than when you would go in December. Do you think that those kind of pressures, or that the time at which the parent would buy the stationery would kind of ease the pressure on them?
I think you put your finger on a critical issue. Forward planning, time-years planning, early planning, that may have started months before is obviously more beneficial in that regard. Last-minute panic buying, and especially when people are stressed, financially stressed during the December year, is more likely to yield those parents that are unable to deliver. But it's not a blame game per se. And say somewhere between the school authorities and the parent lies the ability by adults to do forward planning. I think by now many schools know the buying patterns of their parents, the delivery patterns, how many parents deliver or not, which parents are the ones that are struggling. And they can do that type of financial analysis months beforehand and help those parents to say, look, can we have forward planning? Can you put some money away? This is the list we're going to require. And the schools have to carry the blame, sometimes releasing those lists in November, which obviously puts parents in a very despondent, some parents in a despondent and some in the panic phase when they look at the list of requirements. It can be a patient killer going into December to look at the list of some of what some of the schools are demanding.
Let's look at the role of the government, right, particularly in no-fee paying schools. Right, some of these learners would get the stationery. So for parents who are not able to buy the stationery, there's a lesser burden there.
Well, yes and no. Look, implying that government does supply some of the stationery, and when you speak to SGBs of some of those schools, they will say beyond stationery lies other requirements that is not often spoken about. And sometimes that stationery is not always there on time, for example, and sometimes, and that would impact on the start of the year negatively. And in other cases, the list is a minimal that the government supplies, and sometimes schools require optimal. So schools do sometimes speak to parents and say, look, we do give these books and these books, but could you also give us X, Y, Z, because we need that as part of the learning and teaching. And so, yes, there's some government input for some schools, but I would say it's not always enough.
Yeah, I want us to talk now about some of the, tips that parents can use, because we know that the 12th of January is fast approaching. The shops will be packed, particularly with those moms that are new, their learners or their kids are starting grade 1. They don't know what to do. The list is long. Some of the items are written in ways that are not understood. So what can they do around this time?
Linda, you're asking me on this 4th of January the most unfair question. Let me tell you why I'm saying that. There's like 100,000 or 1 million parents out there that's going to say each of us have our own way of doing things, right? So any recommendations you're going to give us has to fall within my lifestyle, my budget, my school quintile, but the area where I live in, my distance to buying opportunities and so forth. So, if you say what can parents do, of course, the most logical answer would be, look, you need to have planned beforehand and you need to, but that would sound accusationary and alienate me and you from many, many parents. It sounds like we're accusing them of being bad parents. I would say that's the first prize. Please, next year, this is a repeat conversation. So try throughout the year to obviously plan and put little bits of money. Ask your school timelessly, what are we going to require in 12 months' time if my child stays in the school? And then you may want to start, and eating a loaf of bread, one slice at a time, is much more simpler than trying to rush and buy everything. At another level also, schools and parents should work together to look at group buying, even if it's stuff like dental and all of that, because wipes and so forth, the school and the parents should work hand in glove. But asking the parent to work alone on trying to meet some of those needs, we are going to fall short because there are people who are genuinely struggling. And, there's this whole idea that, okay, Christmas was here, people blew their money on luxuries, etc. I'd like to say that is such an elitist argument because in my research and our research and experience with South African people and parents, it's generally a hard time for many. And some of the middle classes who do overindulge, and not only the middle classes, but even other people, that it comes down to planning. And at this stage, you are now in the game. And what can I say? You just need to get some of those ideals met at the school as far as possible. If not, speak closely to your school. Let them understand you don't and what's the plan, instead of not giving your child anything and not going to the school trying to explain. I think that is disastrous because the child is thrown into the deep end alone to fend off and have to face teachers who might be disappointed, who might be angry. And yes, some teachers do make the snide remarks, do say, and turn the eyes upwards and say some parents who ignore their children and even want to tell children, well, since your parent doesn't give you this stuff and everything, in this class you might not be able to have a voice, so you're the last one to speak. I've seen teachers being vindictive in that way, taking their anger out on the children because the children don't have what they require to learn.
Yeah, that was a clinical psychologist and education expert, Gerald Williamson.